Joel chapter 3 Introduction. In the close of the foregoing chapter, we had a gracious promise of deliverance in Mount Zion and Jerusalem. Now, this whole chapter is a comment upon that promise, showing what the deliverance shall be, how it shall be wrought by the destruction of God's enemies, and how it shall be perfected into everlasting rest and joy. Verse 1. Though the bondage of God's people may be grievous and very long, yet it shall not be everlasting. In those days, in that time, this shall be the time when God will restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, when vengeance is executed upon their enemies. Verse 2. All the nations had made themselves liable to the judgment of God for wrong done to his people. They shall be brought down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, which lay near Jerusalem, and there God will plead with them. It is the valley where Jehovah judgeth. When Ammon, Moab, and Edom came against Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, to cast God's people out, he appealed to God. God said, "The battle is not yours, but God's." And God turned their swords, everyone against the other, and none escaped. Therefore, the valley of Jehoshaphat also signifies the valley of judgment. It is in this valley that God will now plead with jealousy for his people and for his heritage Israel. Verse 3. It was customary with conquerors in those days to divide the captives taken in war among themselves by lot. And so did the enemies of the Jews. They parted their land, and each took his share of it as his own. When they were to release these prisoners of war, they cast lots and sold them. They made a jest of them and made a scorn of them as of no value. They gave a boy taken in war for the hire of a harlot, and a girl for so many bottles of wine as would serve them for one sitting. Tyre, Sidon, and Philistia are neighbors of Israel. Though they were neighbors, they were implacable enemies to them. They never came to help Israel at any time. So God is ready to return their recompense upon their own head. Verse 5. The Tyrians, Sidonians, and Philistines had unjustly robbed God of his silver and gold, which were God's goodly pleasant things. These they carried into their temples as trophies of their victory over God's Israel, thinking that their idols triumphed over God. Since they have robbed God itself, he would make judgments accordingly. Verse 6. The Tyrians, Sidonians, and Philistines seized the children of Israel, took them prisoners in war, kidnapped them, and sold them to the Grecians, with whom the men of Tyre traded men, as is said in Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 13, so that they might remove them far off from their own border, so that they might not be easily redeemed and returned back. God says that he will be swift to recompense them back. Verse 7. God will bring them back to their own land from their places where they had been taken away captive. God will return their recompense upon their own heads, as is said in Revelation chapter 13, verse 10. Verse 8. God will recompense them. The men of Judah will take the children of Tyrians, Sidonians, and Philistines and sell them to the Sabeans, a people far off. Sabeans are at the remote extremity of Arabia. Some think it looks as far forward as the last day when the upright shall have dominion and the saints shall judge the world. Verse 9. A challenge is given here to all the enemies of God's kingdom to do their worst. God is preparing war against them, and they are called upon to prepare war against Him. The mighty warriors and men of strength and courage should wake up from their sleep and lethargy in which they are and get themselves in the readiness for war and put themselves at the head of their troops. Verse 10. Let them not complain for want of weapons, but let them beat their plowshares into swords and their pruning hooks into spears. Let them resolve that they will never return to their fields again, but either conquer or die. Let none plead unfitness to bear arms, but let the weak say, I am strong, and venture into the field of battle. Let none make excuses and be absent for this war on the judgment day. Verse 11. When the heathen bring their forces into the field, God brings His mighty warriors and His angels to fight against them. As is said in Psalm 110, verse 6, these hosts of the Lord shall fight His battles when He shall put down all opposing rule, principality, and power. Verse 12. The heathen must be wakened and must come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat to receive their doom. Let them come to this place of God's judgment. Verse 13. Swing the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. That is, their wickedness is great, the measure of it is full, and they are ripe for ruin and God's judgment. The vats overflow with the juice of grapes squeezed out, denoting the great effusion of blood that they were made. The angel who had a sharp sickle in Revelation chapter 14, verse 18 is ready to thrust. Verse 14. The valley of decision is a special name for the valley of Jehoshaphat. In this valley, God will carry out His decision, where every man's eternal state will be determined. Verse 15. The amazing change shall then be made in the kingdom of nature. As is said in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 19, God Himself will be their everlasting light. So the sun and moon will look dark by the far greatness and brightness of that glory. The stars also shall withdraw from shining. All heavenly bodies will lose their glory. Verse 16. The majestic roar of the lion is used to express the victorious utterance of the Lord's judgment. As blessings out of Zion are the sweetest blessings and enough to make heaven and earth sing, so terrors out of Zion are the sorest terrors and enough to make heaven and earth shake. To the righteous it will be a joyful day, because the Lord will be their hope and strength. Verse 17. God is ready to be kind to His people now, because they have changed their attitude. He will protect Jerusalem and dwell in Zion. The Lord will be the hope of his people. Their happiness shall be confirmed. Their holiness shall be completed. No foreigners like the hypocrites, strangers, and ungodly persons will invade Jerusalem to pollute her with false doctrine and superstitious worship. Verse 18. There will be many places on the mountains where they grow grapes. From those grapes, people will be able to make a lot of wine. On the hills, there will be cows and goats that produce a lot of milk. This shows the abundance of overflowing blessings. He will send water to make things grow. He will even send water to the river of acacias. That valley of acacias was a dry valley where only acacias grew. It was right on the edge of the country of Judah. The streams of this plenty overflow the land and enrich it. In this way, the writer is saying the plants will be able to grow everywhere in Judah. Verse 19. The people of Egypt and Edom had shed the innocent blood of the Jews when they fled to them for shelter. Because of this violence of theirs, God here revenges Egypt and Edom. Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness. As is said in Psalm 137:7, God remembers to judge Edom. Verse 20. This crowns all the rest. It's a special promise. It's a precious promise. Judah shall dwell, and Jerusalem shall continue from generation to generation. Judah shall never again be disturbed by any enemies and shall dwell safely and peaceably. Jerusalem shall see and enjoy peace and prosperity. Verse 21. By shedding innocent blood, Judah was rendered unfit for communion with God. But now God will cleanse the blood guilt of Judah that he had not cleansed. There shall not be the least remains of sin in them there. The Lord dwelleth in Zion. Joel chapter 3 questions. Joel chapter 3 answers to the questions.